On Obsessed with Assessment today, I'm talking to the exam board OCR. So I'd better be on my best behaviour, sit up straight, no turning round, they're invigilating. My name is Sam Denno and I am the assessment lead at Twinkl Educational Publishing. Joining me in this episode are Sarah Gotting, Qualifications Product Manager, and Amy Jones, Subject Advisor, both from OCR, who have been working on a radical proposal for the Maths GCSE. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, just to clarify, I'm a product manager at OCR. I'm Sarah. I'm responsible for making sure that all of our qualifications are working for centres and students, looking at improvements, and in this case, really understanding what the future of qualifications should look like.
Hi, I'm Amy and I'm a subject advisor. That essentially means that I'm the teacher link here at OCR. So I go out and talk to all of the teachers and I'm the one that supports them as they go on to deliver the qualification. And right now I've been talking to them a lot about what the future of the qualification might look like.
Brilliant. It's great to have you both here. Now, do Sarah and Amy hold the key to unlocking the assessment burden and reducing post-16 resits? I'll interrogate them after this. This is an assessment in the news episode, so we'll be thinking about the current educational landscape and what can be done to improve existing systems. Maths and English resits are a significant area of the curriculum and assessment review conversation. Sarah or Amy, can you talk us through how they currently work?
Yes, so when GCSEs were reformed around 10 years ago, the rules around maths and English resits were changed. So prior to reform, a grade C in these subjects was still seen as a gateway to further study and work, but there weren't actually any expectations to resit the exams if a student didn't want to, particularly if they weren't intending to move on to further study. Then, at reform in 2014, a policy was introduced that meant that any student who failed to achieve a grade 4 in either English or maths would be required to continue to study them in their 16 to 18 education. Now, this actually accompanied a change in language around passing and failing at GCSE. Pre 2014, a grade D, for instance, was recognised to be a level 1 pass and may have represented an incredible achievement for that student. But with the new GCSEs, the language of standard pass, a grade 4, was introduced, and that had the unintended consequence of implying that a grade 1, 2, or 3 was a fail for these students.
And as you can imagine, this resit policy puts an incredible amount of pressure on students and actually in schools for post-16 settings. We speak to FE colleges who tell us that they actually have to close their centre on GCSE resit days just due to the sheer number of students taking the exams. It also impacts the amount of time students have to study for their level 3 qualifications, which at the end of the day is what they want to be studying and what they're there for. I mean, I remember speaking to a teacher who was working with a student who was hoping to go on and study art at university, and she was in this endless cycle of maths resits. And there's this really powerful quote that the teacher gave me, which was, every resit exam just felt like a mock for the next one, which is just really sums up how horrible this idea of a cycle is.
We'll get into your proposal in just a moment, but I suppose part of what you're trying to address here is almost just that sort of the language of failure, for one thing, that sort of language of grades 1 to 3 where you failed. Then I've been looking at George Kincaid's blog on the Sixth Form Colleges Association website, which I'll link to in the show notes, and he virtually categorically says that the resit formula is not working, as you've alluded to there, Amy. For example, he talks about the demotivating impact of asking students to do more of the same when they already lack confidence. Again, that tallies with the example you've just given. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, the recent interim CAR report that Becky Francis and her team are working on calls this out explicitly, and it says that the experience of multiple resits with no success can have an impact on learners' self-esteem and level of engagement with their studies. And that really chimes with our findings within OCR and as part of Cambridge University Press and Assessment. We released recently our Striking the Balance report and recommendations for change in GCSE Maths, and we really reported within those that the policy is impacting how students perceive their own ability and, of course, the subject themselves. Now, in summer 2024, only 17% of students who were retaking GCSE Maths actually achieved the grade 4 or above that they needed. And many of these students haven't actually ever experienced success in mathematics. And we hear from both students and teachers that this leaves them disengaged and disenfranchised.
Not only that, but these students aren't leaving their educational career with the mathematical skills that will prepare them for life, further education, and the world of work. And this policy has been going on for quite a few years now, and we're starting to see the effect that could be having on adult numeracy and adult mathematics confidence. So there was a recent national numeracy report that came out in 2022 that showed actually 54% of the UK's working age population has low numeracy, and less than a quarter of the working age population has the numeracy level equivalent to a GCSE grade 4 standard pass.
Wow. Did you say summer 2024, only 17% got a grade 4 or above? So 83% got lower than a grade 4?
That's of the students who were retaking.
Right.
Well, for many of those, of course, they'll continue through the resit cycle. If they haven't reached the end of their further education, they will then potentially be put through the resit again in November and then the following summer.
So a lot of young people are clearly struggling there then. So should resits be part of the solution at all?
Yes, we do think that resits are going to be part of a solution, but if we want to help as many students as possible, we're going to have to look much earlier in their education. There's always going to be students who need to or wish to resit their exams. We know that many young people just aren't ready to take a high stakes assessment in maths at age 16. And whilst it would be beneficial to have more flexibility in the system for these students, the resit series does offer a great opportunity for them to demonstrate their competency at a stage when they're ready. But focusing too much on resits isn't getting to the root cause. There are so many missed opportunities to identify where students are struggling earlier on and support them so they don't actually enter the resit cycle. We want as many students as possible to be able to experience success the first time around. And so we're proposing a whole new assessment approach that isn't only designed to make that happen, but it's also designed to ensure that the resit experience itself is as positive as possible.
You're very used to talking through the OCR's proposals now, because I've heard you do it several times. But can you talk us through it and how it addresses both the problem of resits and any other problems that you're trying to tackle?
Absolutely. And I will just begin by outlining the main concerns around Maths GCSE that we identified in both of those reports I mentioned earlier. That's striking the balance and recommendations for change in GCSE Maths. So our diagnosis of problems and our recommendations for solutions are a result of an incredible amount of work. We've spoken to hundreds of teachers, learning societies, students, and all sorts of experts in the area of maths education. And we found 4 main issues. So the first one is that the assessment burden for GCSE Maths is too great. We know that in England, students sit 3 exams, totaling 4.5 hours worth of assessment. Now, we did actually carry out a piece of research internally that looked at how accurate just 2 of these exams would be on predicting a student's final grade. And we found that in Maths GCSE, we could do so in 99.7% of cases. So that really does raise the question of why we're sitting 4.5 hours worth of exams when we could do it potentially in 3. We also know there's just way too much content within the GCSE Maths curriculum and at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 2 and so on. You ask any teacher in England and they will tell you they are struggling to get through the content and they're really struggling to ensure that their students master those fundamental skills. As we've already discussed, we know that the number of students entering GCSE Maths resits is too high. Around 250,000 students are failing to achieve a grade 4 when they sit their GCSE the first time round. And there is this kind of lack of mathematical progress at Key Stage 3. We know that an incredible amount of work is going on at Key Stage 2, but something is happening at Key Stage 3 and that progress is plateauing. So we really want to understand what's happening at that transition and what we can do to support students and centres throughout this stage. So it probably doesn't come as a surprise that we are proposing a reduction in the number of hours of assessment for GCSE Maths. And of course, we're going to need to trim and remove some content to make sure that students have the opportunity to master the skills that they need to be mathematically literate. We'd also like to see reform to the resit policy, and we're looking to introduce a low stakes formative assessment at Key Stage 3. And the aim of that is to show centres the progress their students have made and allow them to diagnose misconceptions and gaps as they move into Key Stage 4.
So we're calling for an introduction of a new GCSE Maths assessment structure where the GCSE gets split into two parts, very similar to the previously coupled AS and A-level system. The idea is that the students will sit a short course GCSE in Maths, which is recognised as a qualification and it holds the currency of a GCSE, very similar to the existing short courses such as those in RS and ICT. Our proposal then differs slightly in the sense that the students would continue to build on what they've learned in the short course by sitting the full course assessments at the end of Year 11, just like they do now. And the idea is that the overall grade will be decided by their performance in both the short course and the full course. And that really, I think, highlights the nature of maths as a subject that really builds and continue to build on the skills that they learned earlier on. This extra flexibility in the assessment structure gives schools, teachers, and students more ownership of their GCSE Maths journey, while providing more options for students across the cohort. It's really about building the confidence for the students and letting them sit the assessments that are appropriate to them at a time when they're ready. We do continue to expect that the vast majority of students will be sitting the full GCSE in Maths, and every student will continue studying Maths until the end of Year 11. But for the really small minority of students who right now find the current GCSE Maths not a viable option for them for whatever reason, the short course gives them another recognised qualification, one which is more approachable. As it's a short course, it covers much less content, and it would be far more focused on the fundamental math skills required for future life, work, and non-mathematical study. Examples of topics would be those core number skills such as estimation and proportional reasoning. And thinking about statistics, it's the ability to interpret everyday real-life graphs. We've done lots and lots of research, had loads of conversations, and we hear from teachers, students, employers, and educational societies that these are the skills that students need to go on and be part of a numerate society. I mean, Sam, earlier you talked about confidence. The opportunity for these students to demonstrate what they can do and experience some success in the subject would be absolutely invaluable when it comes to building their confidence.
That short course option, I don't know if you've got further clarity on it since the last time I heard from you on this, but is the idea that will replace the resit issue? So if you pass the short course, you won't need to do a resit.
That is definitely one of the things that we are calling for, and I think that having that established currency and having the short course be that gateway to future study will make a huge impact in the current reset space.
I really love the sound of your plans. I think you're tackling a lot of issues with the current GCSE very effectively with those things. Are there any blockers to that proposal being accepted?
I'm not sure if you could call these blockers right now, but there are some parts of the current policies and regulations that we are calling for change. For example, we believe that our short course GCSE will fulfil the maths requirements for a vast majority of non-mathematical future work and study pathways. So we are calling for changes to the entry requirements for these courses to recognise the short course. And that means we'll be talking to employers and we'll be talking to higher educational institutes. In a similar vein, we're also calling for the short course to be accepted as a level 2 pass in maths for the post-16 condition of funding, therefore lessening the number of students who find themselves entering this resit cycle. A really big element of what we're trying to do with the short course is to give students the opportunity to experience success and boost their confidence. That's why it's also really important to rethink the language around GCSE grading. While we are still inferring that a grade 3 and below is a fail, it really limits what we can do for student confidence. So we really need to consider how we approach that. The short course could make a real difference, but it isn't the silver bullet that we're relying on to fix everything. It should be one of a number of reforms that we're looking at, and we want to look at the current situation holistically, just like Sarah did earlier when she was listing our 4 key areas for change. I'm thinking that it will be particularly important to start looking at the transition from primary to secondary school and to better assess students before they start GCSE. Currently, a lot of students are falling behind much earlier than at 14 to 16, and intervention earlier on could prevent so many resits.
You mentioned the plateauing at Key Stage 3. What's behind that?
Axiom Maths have done a lot of research out into that, and if you have the time to read that, it's a really, really good insight into some of the problems that are happening in this space. But there's a lot of socio and cultural changes that happen between year 6 and year 7, not just from the student's point of view in terms of just growing up, but also being in a completely different environment. But specifically focusing on maths, we recognise that a lot of the content areas are repeated from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. And so it can feel like students themselves are plateauing in terms of what they're being given to learn, and that really affects their motivation.
We do hear from many centres that as students are brought into year 7, and I think anyone who's worked in a school will know what happens, they are retested. So they spend a lot of year 6 preparing for their SATs, and as they move into year 7, they are retested to ensure that they can be placed into the appropriate set. And I think it does appear as if quite a lot of disengagement happens around this point as well. But one of the other things that we've noted is happening at Key Stage 2, and this is somewhat anecdotal and somewhat evidence-based, is a lot of schools, primary schools, are working really closely with the NCETM Maths hubs, and they're doing a lot of work on capital M mastery. I use the lowercase m mastery quite a lot as I was talking. But they are applying this pedagogy that students seem to be responding really well to. And whilst many secondary schools are working in a mastery approach, it's definitely fewer. So one of the things that we've actually called for outside of the changes to the curriculum and assessment space is making sure that there is more access to these NCETM Maths hubs, because the schools that we do hear, or the secondary schools that we hear are working with them, are really seeing great progress within their students.
Just to be clear, the proposal is what you have submitted as an organisation to the Curriculum and Assessment Review panel. If our listeners think that this all sounds like a really interesting concept, really interesting idea that they would like to kind of support, is there any way that they can add their voice to the call for change or get involved?
Yeah, we would love to hear from anyone who's working in the education space about this. You can get in touch with us at maths@ocr.org.uk if you would like to get involved. We're always looking to talk to more teachers. You can also join our Maths Advisory Panel, which is our feedback gathering platform. We use this to ask targeted questions and to share our initial ideas. We've also been really active about our ideas on social media, so you can join in the discussions on your platform of choice. We're at OCR Maths on X and under OCR on LinkedIn and Facebook.
It's been really exciting to hear about these proposals. Thanks so much, Sarah and Amy, for joining me today. We love to hear what our listeners think about the concepts that we discuss in our episodes. So please email any of your reflections to assessment@twinkl.co.uk. Alternatively, you can find me, Sam Denno, on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. Can listeners find you anywhere, Sarah or Amy?
So I am under Sarah Gotting on LinkedIn.
And I'm under Amy Jones on LinkedIn. But if you email maths@ocr.org.uk, that'll come to me as well.
Brilliant. Please like and subscribe to the podcast and tell your colleagues about us. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.